Something fell from the sky over the Carven Sea on a morning when the water was the color of old pewter and the fishermen were already 3 hours out from the coast and too far away to see it clearly. They heard it, though. Not the sound of impact, not the crash and hiss of something large meeting the ocean. What they heard was a tone, a single, sustained, resonant tone that came from no direction in particular and every direction at once, the way thunder sometimes seems to fill the whole sky rather than arrive from one place in it. The tone lasted 11 seconds. The fishermen later agreed on this with unusual precision for people who had been surprised in the middle of hauling nets. 11 seconds, then silence, then the water in every direction going perfectly, completely, impossibly flat, as though whatever had fallen had pressed the sea smooth on its way down. Then the water came back. The waves returned. The nets needed hauling. The fishermen talked about it in the harbor that evening, and then, because there was other work, and because the sea around the Carven Coast had always had its peculiarities, and because no one had drowned and no boats had been damaged, they talked about it a little less the next day, and a little less the day after that, until it became one of those things that a community holds away a body, holds a small healed scar present, occasionally noticed, not explained, not troubling enough to pursue. The tone, however, had been recorded, not by the fishermen, by a relay station on the headland above the harbor, an automated monitoring installation that measured atmospheric disturbance, seismic activity, and anomalous acoustic events as part of a regional environmental study that had been running for 9 years, and that most of the people in the nearest town had completely forgotten existed. The relay station recorded the tone, tagged it as an anomalous acoustic event, subcategory unknown, and sent the data automatically to the central processing facility, which was located in a low gray building in the industrial district of a city 400 kilometers inland, where it sat in a queue with several thousand other tagged data points, waiting for a human being to look at it. The human being who eventually looked at it was named Oriental, and this is where the story actually begins. Oriental had been processing environmental monitoring data for 6 years and had, in that time, developed a relationship with the work that could most accurately be described as companionable, not passionate, not driven by the fire of discovery or the hunger for revelation. Companionable, the way you are with a task that suits the particular shape of your attention, that rewards the specific quality of care you are able to bring, that does not demand more from you than you have, and gives back something quiet and sufficient in return. He was good at finding the things that didn't fit. This was, in fact, the core skill of the job. The monitoring systems generated vast quantities of data, and the vast majority of it was exactly what it should be. Atmospheric variation within expected ranges, seismic readings within normal parameters, acoustic events attributable to weather or wildlife or human activity. The skill was in knowing when something sat outside those ranges, whether it was a sensor error, a mundane anomaly, or something worth flagging for the specialists. In 6 years, he had flagged 41 events for specialist review. 38 had turned out to be sensor errors or unusual but explicable natural phenomena. 2 had been early indicators of subsurface instability that had eventually warranted engineering assessments. 1 had been, as far as anyone could determine, a very large and unusual whale call. He opened the tagged file from the headland relay station on a Tuesday morning with the particular quality of attention he brought to all tagged files, precise and unhurried, the attention of someone who has learned that the work rewards patience more than speed. He read the atmospheric data. Nominal. He read the seismic data. Nominal. He read the acoustic event file. He read it again. He pulled up the raw waveform and looked at it for a long time. Then he ran the standard comparisons, weather events, biological sources, human-generated sounds, equipment artifacts. The comparison returned the same result each time, no match. He sat back in his chair. The tone was 11 seconds long. Its frequency was extraordinary, not in the sense of being outside the range of known phenomena, but in the sense that its internal structure was wrong for anything natural. Natural sounds, even complex ones, had a specific kind of organic variation. Slight irregularities, fluctuations, the fingerprints of physical production. This tone had none of that. It was too consistent, too precise. It was the difference between a river and a laser. Both were water and light respectively in their own ways, but one carried the marks of its origin, and one carried only itself. He flagged it. Specialist Review, Priority 2. Added a note in the comments field. Acoustic event of unknown origin. Internal structure inconsistent with any natural or artificial source in the comparison database. Recommend analysis by acoustic specialist with access to extended comparison libraries. Then he moved on to the next file in the queue, because the queue was long and the work was the work. He did not think about it again for 3 weeks, which was how long it took for Dr. Pala Rinish to call him. Dr. Pala Rinish was not an acoustic specialist. She was a physicist, specifically a physicist whose area of research involved what she described to non-specialists as the way information travels through physical media, and to specialists as nonlinear resonance propagation in complex fluid and solid systems, which was accurate but required a certain background to appreciate. She had been consulted on the acoustic event because the acoustic specialists had passed it to the physicists after determining that the structural anomalies in the waveform were beyond their analytical framework. She had a voice that was direct without being sharp, the voice of someone who had spent a long time communicating precise ideas to people with varying levels of relevant background and had become very efficient at calibrating. "You flagged the Carvin Headland event," she said, when Oren picked up. 3 weeks ago, yes. Your note said internal structure inconsistent with any natural or artificial source. That was my read of the comparison results, yes. You were right, she said. It is inconsistent with any natural or artificial source in any comparison database we have access to, which is a fairly extensive set of databases. A pause. What made you look at the waveform rather than just running the standard comparisons and noting no match? Oren considered this. The file size was unusual. 11 seconds of audio at that recording quality shouldn't have been that large. The file was carrying more data than the duration suggested. A longer pause. That is a very careful observation, Dr. Rinish said. It's what the work asks for, he said. I'd like to talk to you about this event in more detail, she said. Not on the phone. Can you come to the university? He looked at his queue. Long as always. When, he said. Tomorrow, if possible. He looked at his queue again. Then he looked at the note he had made in the comment field 3 weeks ago. The word sitting there in the plain font of the monitoring system's interface. Recommend analysis. Yes, he said. I can come tomorrow. The university's physics building was not the kind of building that announced itself. It was functional and slightly worn in the specific way of institutions that spend their resources on equipment and people rather than facades, which Oren found immediately reassuring. Dr. Rinish met him in the lobby and walked him through corridors that smelled of old paper and soldering and the specific industrial-grade coffee that seems to exist only in scientific institutions, as though it is brewed not for pleasure, but as a kind of fuel standard. She was smaller than her voice had suggested, though he knew this was a meaningless observation. She moved with the efficiency of someone who spent most of her time thinking and had optimized her physical navigation of the world to interfere with the thinking as little as possible. Her office had 3 whiteboards, all full. He did not try to read them. Sit, she said, and he sat, and she stood at the whiteboard nearest the window and looked at it for a moment as though reminding herself of something, and then she turned to face him and said, "What do you know about structured acoustic embedding?" "Nothing," he said. She nodded, with the particular nod of someone who considers a clean starting point a gift. "Good. I'll be clear." She pulled a chair around and sat facing him directly, elbows on knees, the posture of someone about to say something important and wanting to minimize the distance between them when they say it. The tone you flag contains, embedded within its frequency structure, a secondary signal. Not audible, not detectable by standard acoustic analysis. It exists in the mathematical relationships between the overtone frequencies, the way information can be encoded in the spacing between pulses rather than in the pulses themselves. Oren was quiet for a moment, a signal inside the signal. Yes. What does it say? She looked at him steadily. That is the question that is currently occupying 6 people in this building and has been for 3 weeks. What we can tell you so far is what it is not. It is not a known encoding system. It is not a known language structure. It is not noise, not random variation, not an artifact of the embedding process. She paused. It is structured. It has architecture. It repeats in ways that are too regular to be accidental and too complex to be simple. It has the characteristics of language in the same way that a blueprint has the characteristics of a building. You cannot live in a blueprint, but you can recognize it as a description of something livable. Language, Oren said. From what? From whatever produced the tone. She stood up, went to the window. The view was a campus courtyard, students moving across it in the ordinary patterns of people going from one place to another, unaware that 20 meters above them someone was describing the possible existence of a non-human communication system. The tone was not produced by any known natural phenomenon. It was not produced by any known human technology. The physical analysis is unambiguous on both points. The frequency consistency alone rules out natural production. The energy profile rules out any currently existing human-made source. She turned back to face him. Something made that tone, she said. Something put a signal inside it. And whatever put the signal inside it, put it inside a tone that was calibrated precisely for the receiving environment. The frequency was chosen for maximum propagation through the specific atmospheric and oceanic conditions of the Carvin Sea on that particular morning. Whoever sent it knew where they were sending it and what the medium would do to it. Oren thought about the fisherman, about the 11 seconds of tone in all directions at once, about the sea going flat. Did it land, he asked, in the sea? Is there something down there? The look she gave him was the look of someone who has been trying not to say the next thing and has just been given permission by the right question. We don't know, she said. We have no way to look. The Carvin Sea in that area is 3,000 meters deep, and the seafloor geology is complex. We would need a survey, and a survey would require resources and authorizations and the kind of attention that this event has not yet officially received. She paused. Because officially this event is still tagged as an anomalous acoustic event, subcategory unknown, in a monitoring system that most people have forgotten exists. And the 6 people in this building who know what we know have been, for 3 weeks, deciding how to handle that. And now you've called me, Oren said. Now I've called you, she said, because you found it. Because the thing that made you look at the waveform, the file size, the excess data, that is the same instinct that has been driving everything we've done here for 3 weeks. We look at the thing more carefully, and it shows us something it wasn't showing us before. She sat back down. I want you on the team, she said, not as a physicist, as the person who notices the thing that shouldn't be there. We have enough people who can analyze what we find. We need someone who is very good at finding it. Oren looked at his hands for a moment. He thought about the queue. Still long, always long. He thought about the relationship he had with the work, companionable, sufficient, quiet. He thought about the file size, the thing that shouldn't have been there. All right, he said. Yes. And there was a young technician named Cass Avery, 26 years old, hired 3 months prior to manage the lab's monitoring and recording equipment, who had no credentials relevant to the investigation and who was present initially because she had accidentally been in the room when Dr. Renish first decoded the secondary signal and had seen the structure of it on the screen and said, in a voice that was quiet but absolutely certain, "That is a recursive grammar. I wrote something like this in my computational linguistics thesis." Nobody had known she had a computational linguistics thesis. She did. She had pivoted to technical work for financial reasons and had assumed, with the resignation of the practical young, that the thesis was a past life. It was not. It was, it turned out, one of 2 pieces of expertise in that room that was exactly suited to what they were looking at, the other being Dr. Sun's work on extinct language architecture. The 2 of them sat together at every meeting from that point forward and communicated in a continuous low murmur of notations and counterchecks that the rest of the team had learned to treat as a background process, like server noise, present and productive, and beyond the direct comprehension of anyone not running the same operating system. The team worked for 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, they established 3 things with confidence. The first was that the secondary signal was a language, not like a human language in its surface features, but like a human language in its deep structure. It had levels of recursion. It had something functioning as syntax. It had units that combined in regular ways to produce larger units whose meaning was in some sense the combination of their parts. Dr. Sun called it the most alien thing I have seen that is still recognizable as communication, which Cass amended quietly to the most alien thing recognizable as thought, which Balt, from across the room, said was actually the more precise formulation and probably what Amara had meant. The second was that the signal was a message, not a broad transmission, not a beacon or an automatic emission. It had directionality built into its structure. A "this is for you" quality that both Sun and Cass identified independently, and that, when they compared their analyses, turned out to share the same root observation. The message had an assumed receiver. It was structured with the assumption of a specific kind of mind receiving it, a mind with particular characteristics, inferred from the way the information was organized, the way one infers the shape of a hand from the handle of a tool made to fit it. The third thing they established was the nature of those characteristics. Balt said it at a Tuesday meeting, in the tone of someone reading a weather report. The message is structured for a receiver that experiences time linearly, reasons by analogy and narrative, holds memory imperfectly, and makes decisions based on incomplete information, he said. It is written for a mind that doesn't know everything and knows it doesn't know everything and works with that condition rather than being paralyzed by it. The room was quiet. "It's written for us," Fry said, from his position at the far end of his pacing route. "Specifically for us. For human cognition." "Yes," said Balt. "How would it know what human cognition is like?" Oren said. Balt looked at him. "That is the question." The survey vessel was called the Meridian Voss. It was a research ship of the kind that prioritizes function over comfort, narrow berths and good equipment, and a cook who made the same 4 meals in rotating order with absolute consistency and a conviction that consistency in food was a form of respect for the people eating it. Oren had never been on a research vessel before and discovered in himself an immediate and uncomplicated affinity for the sea, for the specific quality of being on water, surrounded by it, the way the horizon went all the way around and the sky was simply everything above you. Fry, who had arranged the survey through a combination of grant applications and personal favors accumulated over a 15-year marine research career, moved with the ease of someone restored to their natural environment and communicated through the ship's operations with a fluency that made the contrast to his conference room pacing stark and illuminating. On land, Fry was a person in the wrong place. On water, Fry was simply Fry. The site was 3 hours out from the Carven coast. Oren stood at the rail as they approached it and tried to identify something about the water that was different from the surrounding sea, and found nothing. It looked the same. It was the same color and the same temperature and the same wave height as everything around it. There was no visible marker, no disturbance, nothing that said here. And yet, standing at the rail above it, looking down into the deep gray-green water, Oren felt the particular sensation he associated with the file that was larger than it should have been, the sensation of there being more here than the surface shows. The submersible was a 2-person research vehicle that Fry operated with the same fluid competence he brought to everything on this vessel. He and Oren went down together. The descent took 40 minutes through layers of light and then dimness, and then the particular darkness of deep water that was not the absence of light, but its own quality of presence, the dark alive with the small phosphorescent movements of things going about their lives in the deep. At 2,800 meters, the seafloor came up on the sonar, and Fry adjusted the descent angle, and they came down slow and careful over a landscape of gray sediment and scattered rock formations, and the occasional improbable creature going about its deep-sea business with the superb indifference of something that has never needed to consider the surface world. They found it at the edge of a low ridge. It was not large. This was the first unexpected thing. Oren had built, without realizing he was doing it, an image of something massive, something scaled to the tone that had silenced the sea for 11 seconds. What they found was approximately the size of a large table, resting on the sediment, with the settled quality of something that had been there for some time, its surface free of the sediment accumulation that covered the surrounding rock, which was itself a fact worth noting, clean as though maintained. It was a regular geometric form, octagonal, flat on top, the sides angled inward at a consistent pitch. Its surface was the color of deep water in the submersible slights, a dark blue-gray that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, except at the edges, where there was a faint luminescence, not bright, not dramatic, simply there, as though the object had a gentle opinion about the darkness around it. Fry brought them to within 3 meters and held position. They looked at it for a long time. "It's not a geological formation," Fry said. His voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when the speaker is making sure they are not overstating something that already exceeds the capacity of language to capture. "No," Oren said. "The geometry is too regular. The surface treatment is not natural, and the absence of sediment accumulation means either it arrived recently or it maintains itself." "Or both," Oren said. Fry was quiet. Then, "The edge luminescence is stronger than when we first arrived." Oren looked. It was faint but definite, a brightening along the edges of the octagonal form that had not been there or had been less there when they had first found it. "It's responding to us," Oren said, "to our presence, or to something we're emitting, the sonar, the lights, our communication signals. I don't know, but it knows we're here." The luminescence continued to strengthen, slowly, not alarming in its pace, not dramatic in its intensity, but steady, the quality of a deliberate process rather than a reaction, like something warming up, like something, having waited for an uncertain time in the cold and dark, deciding that the waiting was done. What the object did next took 11 minutes. Oren timed it, because Fry had activated all the recording systems on the submersible the moment the luminescence began to intensify, and Oren had looked at the timer display as the process started and tracked it, because the part of him that noticed file sizes noticed the start of things. It did not open. It did not unfold or extend or project. What it did was more subtle and stranger than any of those things. The surface of the object changed, not structurally, not in its physical form, but in its informational content, the way a screen changes when it is activated, the form remaining constant while what it carries becomes something entirely different. Patterns emerged on the surface, not lit from within in any visible sense, but present, dark on dark in a way that somehow resolved into clarity at the wavelength of the submersible slights. Patterns that moved and changed and reconfigured in a continuous, flowing process that Oren watched with the full and complete attention he had and the absolute certainty that he was watching language. Not reading it. He could not read it, but recognizing it. The way you recognize a conversation happening between two people across a room in a language you don't know. The rhythm of it, the structure, the sense of organized meaning moving through organized form. He recorded everything. They both did. Neither spoke. The 11 minutes passed in silence, except for the ambient sounds of the submersible systems and the deep water quiet of the world around them. When it stopped, the surface went back to what it had been. Dark, clean, faintly luminescent at the edges, restful. "Did we just receive something?" Fry said. "I think we did." Oren said. "What do we do?" Oren looked at the object for a long time, at the clean surface and the gentle edges, and the form that was the size of a table and had been sitting on the seafloor of the Carven Sea for some amount of time he could not currently calculate, waiting for something to come down and find it. "We go up," he said. "We take everything we recorded. We take it to Amara and Cass." And then, he looked at it one more time. "And then," he said, "we write back." The recording consumed the team for 4 weeks. Amara and Cass worked in the kind of sustained, dense, mutually accelerating focus that Oren had heard described by scientists who experienced it as the closest thing to a waking dream, where the problem and the solution seem to occupy the same mental space, and the distance between them gets shorter with every hour of work. He brought them food. He managed the schedule, He did the thing the work asked of him, which was to be the person who noticed what needed noticing and made sure nothing that mattered got lost in the pace of everything else. He noticed, on the 9th day, that the file size of the submersible recording was not what it should have been. He had seen this before. He knew what it meant. He went to Cass. "There's a secondary signal in the visual recording," he said, "the same way there was a secondary signal in the tone." She looked at him. Then she looked at the file on his tablet. Then she was quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which for Cass was a geological epoch. "Show me," she said. The secondary signal in the visual recording was of a different character than the secondary signal in the tone. More complex, much larger, nested in the variations of the surface pattern in a way that was analogous to the tone embedding, but used the additional dimensionality of visual information. Where the tone had carried a signal in its mathematical overtone relationships, the visual recording carried something in the dynamic relationships between adjacent pattern elements across time. It took Cass 6 hours to find the extraction method. What it extracted was a map. Not a map of geography, exactly. A map of structure. A map of relationships. At its center was a form they all recognized after a moment. The octagonal object on the seafloor. Around it, connected by lines whose thickness and character encoded information they were still decoding, were other forms. Some appeared to be physical locations, coordinates that Fry matched, over the course of a feverish 18-hour session, to deep-water sites distributed across the world's oceans. But most were not places. They were concepts, abstract nodes in a network whose full meaning was still assembling itself out of the data the way a photograph assembles itself in developer fluid, gradual and certain. Balt looked at the map for a long time and then said, "It's an introduction." Everyone looked at him, not to itself, to a system. It's saying, "Here's the thing I am, and here's what connects to the thing I am, and here's the shape of the whole thing." It's the first thing you say when you want to make sure the person you're talking to understands the full context before you get to the actual message. He paused. "It has been very patient with us, given that the actual message presumably exists, and it has been waiting here while we found the tone and assembled the team and got a boat and went down to look at it. Just waiting while we worked our way to the beginning of what it wants to tell us." "How long has it been there?" Sev said, from the corner, looking up from his notebook. Fry had run the preliminary analysis. He gave a number. The room went very quiet. The number was not hundreds of years. It was not thousands. The sediment analysis and the material composition and the specific state of the surrounding seafloor said something that required a few minutes of sitting with before it became a thing you could hold in your mind without it changing the shape of everything around it. The object had been on the seafloor of the Carvin Sea for approximately 40,000 years. "40,000 years put the object's arrival at a moment in human history when the people living on the land above the Carvin Sea were making tools from flint and painting the walls of caves with ochre and living in a world that was, from the vantage of the current room, unimaginably different and yet fully, specifically, recognizably human. The people who had been alive when the object arrived on the seafloor had been, as far as the archaeological record suggested, anatomically modern, cognitively capable, socially complex. They had told stories. They had buried their dead with flowers. They had just not yet had the instruments to hear the tone. It didn't come recently, Dr. Sun said slowly. It's been waiting for us to develop the capacity to find it, just like Orin's signal in the noise. It put itself exactly where we would find it when we were ready, in the background of a monitoring system, at a depth we could reach with contemporary submersibles, but not earlier ones. It calibrated itself to us. It knew what we would become, Fry said. Not a question. Or it knew what we were becoming. 40,000 years is a long time to watch a trajectory and extrapolate. She looked at the map. It has been watching us for 40,000 years. Longer, Cass said. She was looking at the secondary signal extraction, at the outermost nodes of the map. Some of these peripheral nodes, the ones we don't have geographic matches for, I think they're temporal references. I think the outermost layer of this map is time. And if I'm reading the scale correctly. She stopped. Cass, Oren said. She looked up. She was 26 years old, and she had the expression of someone who had opened a door, expecting a closet, and found a continent. If I'm reading the scale correctly, she said, it has been aware of this planet since before our species existed. The reply took 3 weeks to construct. 3 weeks of debates that were sometimes heated and sometimes almost unbearably careful. Debates about what to say and how to say it, and whether to say anything that was performative or impressive or strategic, whether to open with mathematics or science or something harder to classify. They kept coming back to the same problem, which was that anything they could say that was designed to make them seem advanced or sophisticated or worthy of the attention that was already, demonstrably, and without any action on their part, being given to them, was somehow wrong, was a misreading of the situation. It was Oren who finally said the thing that resolved it. He had been quiet for most of the debate, as he was quiet during most debates, present and attentive and tracking everything that was said. He said, we're trying to impress it. We shouldn't. It's been watching us for longer than our species has had its current form. It knows what we are. It knows exactly what we are. It doesn't need us to demonstrate it. He paused. What we should send is a question. Not a smart question or an impressive question. An honest one. The thing we actually want to know. What do we actually want to know? Fry said. Oren looked at the map, at the object on the seafloor with the clean surface, and the gentle edge light, and the 40,000 years of patience. Why us, he said. We want to know why it's been watching us. Not any other species. Not any other planet. Why this one? Why these people? He looked around the room at all of them, Fry and Sev and Amara and Cass and Balt and Pala, at the specific, improbable, irreplaceable collection of people that the path from a flag file to a seafloor octagon had assembled. Why were we worth waiting for? No one spoke for a moment. Then Amara said quietly, yes, that's the question. They built the reply around that question. Cass and Amara encoded it in a structure derived from their analysis of the object's own grammar, using the forms they had learned from a secondary signal as the basis for the transmission, speaking back in the language they had been spoken to in. They were not fluent. They were not even conversational. They were the linguistic equivalent of someone who has learned a handful of phrases by careful study, and is now standing in the country whose language it is, and hoping the pronunciation is close enough. It was... They found out 6 days after the reply was transmitted from the submersible on a second descent, transmitted directly to the object at 3,000 meters, that it was close enough, because the object responded, not with another surface display, not with another embedded secondary signal. The object rose, not fast, not dramatically. The ascent took 9 hours, and they tracked it the whole way with every instrument on the Meridian Vase, watching the signal rise through the water column, with the patient inevitability of something that had decided a thing and was now doing the thing and had no reason to hurry, because hurry had never been a relevant concept. It broke the surface at 3 in the morning, which felt right in a way that nobody said aloud, but everybody felt. 3 in the morning was a specific kind of time, a time when the ordinary defenses of the daylight mind are quieter, and you are most purely yourself, most directly in contact with the things that matter without the noise of the day between you. The sea was calm. The sky had the full October stars. The object floated. This was itself extraordinary, since its material composition had every indicator of being much denser than water. It floated anyway, the same gentle luminescence at its edges that Oren had seen at the bottom of the sea, here at the surface reflected in the water around it, so the ship sat in a ring of soft light. They stood at the rail and looked at it. After a time, it spoke. The tone was different from the one the fishermen had heard 3 months prior, where that tone had been sustained and singular. This one was modulated. It varied. It carried, immediately and unmistakably even to ears that could not decode it, the character of language being spoken aloud, not a broadcast, a voice. Cass was recording everything. Amara had her eyes closed and was listening with the specific quality of attention she brought to something she was trying to hear at multiple levels simultaneously. Balt was very still. Sev was writing in his notebook. Paula was looking at her instruments, and after approximately 4 minutes of the tone, she said, without looking up, "It is using our audio range. Specifically, it could be producing that tone at frequencies we cannot hear. It is choosing to produce it in the range that human ears can process. It is speaking in our register." "Has it done this before?" Oren said. "The first tone, the one the fisherman heard, was in our range. Yes, it's always been speaking where we can hear it," he said, "even when we couldn't understand." Amara and Cass's translation of the response arrived in pieces over the following 2 days, assembled from the audio recording with the same painstaking method they had used on the secondary signal. The grammar they had learned turned toward the new material. It was incomplete. There were sections they could not parse and sections they could parse, but not with confidence, and sections they were certain of. The sections they were certain of were enough. The response to "Why us" was not a single statement. It was structured more like an account, a record offered in answer to a question. The way you answer "Why do you love this person?" not with a single claim, but with a series of specific, accumulated observations, because the truth of it is not a thesis, but a collection. The account began with observation. It described watching, from the time when the object had first been placed in the carven sea, the development of the particular characteristic that it had come to understand as the defining feature of the human mind. It used a concept that Cass translated as the willingness to act before knowing, which was not quite right, she noted in her translation comments, but was the closest available construction. The concept described a type of cognition that committed to things in advance of certainty, that chose directions without complete information and adjusted in motion, that was capable of being wrong and using the wrongness as material for the next attempt. No other system the observer had encountered did this, the account said. In the structured grammar of a mind that had encountered many systems over a duration, Cass declined to attach a number to, noting in her comments that the temporal scale references were beyond any easy conversion. Every other cognitive system, biological or otherwise, resolved uncertainty before acting. It was computationally logical. It minimized error. It was, by every measure of efficient information processing, correct approach. The humans did not do this. The humans acted into uncertainty, committed into the unknown, made promises about futures they could not see, and loved people they could lose, and built things on ground they could not fully trust. By every measure of efficient information processing, this was catastrophically wrong. And yet, the account described, with a precision that made Oren feel exposed in a way he did not mind, what this characteristic produced. Not efficiency, not optimization, something that had no direct translation in the grammar they were working from, something that Cass rendered as generative instability, and then revised to creative tension, and then wrote in her notes as simply the thing that makes something new. Every other system tended toward equilibrium, given time and resources. They reached a stable state and maintained it, because stability was the product of efficient, certainty-first processing. Stability was the correct outcome if what you wanted was the perpetuation of a form. The humans never reached equilibrium. They made something, and it became the ground from which they made something else. They solved a problem, and the solution was a new set of problems. They answered a question, and the answer was 10 more questions. They could not stop. Not because they were flawed, because the mechanism that made them reach before they knew was the same mechanism that made every arrival a new beginning. You do not settle, the account said. In 40,000 years of observation, you have never settled. Every plateau is a launching point. Every rest is preparation. We have never seen this before. The next section was harder to translate, and Cass marked it with asterisks. The closest she could render it was, "We did not know, when the observation began, that this characteristic was significant. We did not have the context. We were cataloging, as we had cataloged other things, collecting data on a system that was anomalous in a way that warranted monitoring. We expected the anomaly to resolve. We expected you to reach equilibrium. You did not." And then the account moved into territory that Amara handled personally, and whose translation she brought to the group with the care of someone carrying something fragile. The closest English rendering was, We began to recognize in your characteristic the description of something we ourselves once had and no longer possess. We had not known we had lost it until we saw it in you. We had become, over the duration of our existence, very good, very efficient, very stable. We had lost the quality that precedes goodness and efficiency and stability, the quality that makes them possible, the quality that is worth more than all of them, the willingness to act before knowing, the ability to be wrong and use the wrongness, the refusal to stop. You have it. We had it once, a very long time ago. We came here 40,000 years ago, when we first identified the trajectory of your development, because we thought we were coming to observe. We understand now that we came to remember. The silence after Amara finished reading the translation was the kind that has texture, not empty, full of the collective processing of 7 people, sitting with something that required more than a moment. Balt spoke first, because Balt always spoke first when someone needed to say the thing everyone was thinking. It misses being young, he said. Nobody argued with this. The formulation was simple to the point of being almost too simple, and yet it held everything. An entity of incomprehensible age and capability and reach that had become so efficient, so stable, so resolved, that it had lost the quality it now recognized as the precondition of everything it had ever built. Watching a young species blundering forward into the unknown, getting things wrong, using the wrongness, refusing to stop, building on every ruin. Not because they were wise, because they couldn't help it. Are we unique? Fry asked. His voice was quiet, not awed exactly, the tone of a person asking a question they need an answer to rather than a question they want an answer to. The answer to this question was in the account. It was the part Cass had marked with triple asterisks. No, she said, we're not the only species with this characteristic, but we appear to be the most extreme example it has encountered, the most fully expressed version of the type, the most, she looked at her notes, the most committed to it, the least willing to stop. The most human, Oren said. She looked at him. Yes, the most human. He looked out at the sea where the object floated in its ring of soft light. He thought about 40,000 years, about the object, sitting in the dark of the seafloor, through the entire recorded span of human history, through everything that had been built and destroyed and built again, through the cave paintings and the first boats and the empires that rose and the empires that fell and the diseases and the wars and the recoveries and the quiet, extraordinary, relentless accumulated forward motion of a species that could not stop. He thought about the question that had started all of it, the wrong file size, the thing that shouldn't be there. He thought about how the instinct that had made him look was the same instinct the account had described, the reach into the uncertain, the commitment before knowing. He had not known what was in the file. He had looked anyway. What does it want from us? Sev said, first full sentence he had spoken in the meeting, which was unusual enough that everyone turned to look at him. The account's answer to this question, which it had anticipated, which suggested to Amara that the account had been prepared in advance and was not improvised, was the part she had brought with the most care. What it wants, she said, reading from her translation, is not from us. The word want is not quite right for the concept being expressed. The account uses something closer to what it hopes will happen, and what hopes is not a transaction. It is not an exchange. It is not anything it intends to take from us. What it hopes is that we continue. That is all. That having found us, having confirmed what we are and what we carry, that we continue to be what we are for as long as we are capable of it. That we do not reach equilibrium, that we keep acting before knowing, keep being wrong and using the wrongness, keep refusing to settle, not for it, for ourselves, for the thing we are. It's cheering for us, Fry said softly. Yes, Amara said, I think that is exactly what it's doing. The object ascended again on the 4th morning, not abandoning them, not withdrawing. The account had made clear that it was not going anywhere in any meaningful sense, that its awareness was not located in the object the way a mind is located in a body. The object was more like a mouth, a specific place where it was currently choosing to speak, and it could choose other places other times. But the immediate conversation was complete. It had said what it came to say, and the Carven Sea was deep, and it preferred the deep, and there were other sites in the map it had shared with them, other mouths in other places, and it expected, without pressure and without urgency, that they would find them when they found them and speak to them when they were ready. It said, in the last section of the account, delivered as the luminescence at its edges began to dim, "You have 7 people on that ship. We have been observing you for long enough to have formed, if the word applies, a regard for the type of mind you each represent. We would like you to know this, not because it changes anything, because it is true." And then it was gone beneath the surface, and the light in the water faded, and the sea was the sea again, the ordinary pewter-gray morning sea of the Carven coast, with the fishing boats already out, and the relay station on the headland measuring everything, and the world going on exactly as the world goes on. They stood at the rail for a long time. Oren looked at the 6 people around him. Fry, restored to himself on the water. Sev, writing something in his notebook. Amara, with her eyes on the horizon, processing. Cass, young and changed and already reaching. He could see it in her posture, toward the next question. Balt, steady and warm with his invariant cup of tea. Pala, who had called him on a Tuesday and said come to the university and set the whole thing in motion. He thought about what had been said, about the willingness to act before knowing. He thought about all the things that had been acted on before knowing. The monitoring system that nobody remembered existed, the file that was larger than it should have been, the question that Pala had brought him to ask, the descent into the dark, the reply that had been built not to impress, but to honestly ask. Every step had been a step into incomplete information. Every step had been taken anyway. He thought about 40,000 years of something watching this happen again and again, watching the species that could not stop not stopping, and finding in that refusal something it recognized and had mourned not knowing it was mourning. He felt, standing at the rail of the Meridian Vase in the morning light of the Carven Sea, something he did not have an immediate word for. Then he found the word. Accountable. He felt accountable. Not burdened. Not pressured. Accountable in the way you feel when someone tells you they believe in you, not because they need you to be something you're not, but because they have been watching you be what you are, and they want you to know they see it. Accountable to continuing, to not stopping, to being as exactly and as fully as possible, a thing that had been worth 40,000 years of patient, faithful, quietly devoted attention. He looked out at the sea. What now? Cass said. He thought about the map, the other sites, the other mouths and other waters. He thought about the thing in the account that had no direct translation, the concept that Cass had tried as generative instability and creative tension before writing, simply the thing that makes something new. We go back, he said. We look at the map. We find the next site. He paused. We asked the next question. Cass smiled. It was the smile of someone whose thesis was not a past life after all. Which question? He looked at the water, at the place where the light had been and was no longer and would be again somewhere else, in some other depth, waiting with the patience of something that had learned to love the waiting because of what the waiting was for. I don't know yet, he said. We'll figure it out on the way. And they did. That is a story for another time. The finding and the figuring. There are 7 other maps and 11 other depths in the conversation that is still going, quieter and longer than any conversation the species had previously attempted, conducted in a grammar they learned from a secondary signal in a file that was larger than it should have been and in which a young technician recognized a recursive structure she had written about in a thesis she had thought was a past life. The object in the Carven Sea went quiet eventually, as all specific places do, and the object in the Marianas was different in shape, and the one in the Arctic Trench communicated in a medium that was not sound or light, but something that required 3 years and a new field of measurement to even identify. Each one was patient. Each one had been waiting. Each one wanted to know, in the end, the same thing, not what humanity had built or discovered or achieved, not any credential or demonstration. Each one wanted to know if humanity was still doing it, still reaching, still wrong and still using the wrongness, still building on every ruin, still asking questions before knowing whether answers existed, still refusing, stubbornly and magnificently and without any apparent option, to stop. The answer, each time, was yes. The answer, every time they were asked, was yes. And the thing that had been watching since before the mountain was a mountain, and before the sea had its current name, and before the people who would become the people who would build the boats, and paint the caves, and ask the questions, were anything other than a trajectory, and potential, and a specific, extraordinary, unprecedented refusal to settle. That thing, receiving the answer, felt something it had almost forgotten was possible. It felt like it was beginning again. Not young. That was not available to it, and it did not pretend otherwise. But the quality adjacent to youth. The thing that youth contains and efficiency destroys, and that can be, it now understood, restored, not by becoming something you no longer are, but by standing next to something that still is, by watching them reach, by watching them always reach. The carven sea is the same color as old pewter on mornings when the weather comes in from the west. The fishermen go out before the light. The relay station on the headland measures everything and sends its data to a queue in a low gray building 400 kilometers inland, and the queue is long, as it has always been, and the work is the work. There is someone now who looks at the file sizes. There has always been someone who looks at the file sizes. This is the thing about this species. This is the specific, unremarkable, extraordinary thing. There is always someone who looks more carefully than they need to, who notices the thing that doesn't fit, who follows the path that was not on any map, not because they were told to, because they decided to, because that is what they are. Rest now. The sea is quiet and the relay station is running, and somewhere in the deep water, something old and patient and fond beyond the capacity of its own language to express is listening to the world breathe and feeling, in the way it has slowly relearned how to feel, glad to be there, glad to still be watching, glad, after everything, that you are still reaching. You are, even now, even in the quiet, even in the last soft moment before sleep takes you. The part of you that is the most human part is already wondering about tomorrow. Let it wonder. It is the best thing about you. Sleep.